Okay, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass and the story of the Red Queen. But Alice comes upon the Red Queen, and the Red Queen grabs her hand and they start running. And Alice pretty quickly realizes, like, wait, we're not going anywhere. And to which the Red Queen responds, my dear, here we must run as fast as we can just to stay in place. And if you wish to go anywhere, you must run twice as fast as that. And I don't know about you, but I often feel like that is the story of my work life. And so really I'm going to be focusing on how I think project management software can help you get some sense of forward progress. So you can run, but actually move ahead. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about me, the damsel in distress. Shannon mentioned earlier, I was part of the 2020 Ideastarter cohort. I'm also a supervisor and project manager at the Public Works GIS group. So we do a lot of utility mapping, and then we also problem solve around how we make that data available to folks in the department and in the city. And then there's one more important fact about me, and that's that I'm constantly distracted. And this Post-it note was put on my computer at the office probably about 2 years ago by one of the folks I supervise, who is himself incredibly distracted. So that tells you that I have a real problem with being distracted. Okay, so, oops, wrong way. We can get this to work. All right, let's meet our hero. So the only project management software I've used is Trello. So that's going to be my focus of my talk today, but there's also Jira, I think Monday. So there's a range of them, and I think they all do more or less the same thing, but I'll be talking specifically about Trello. So what is Trello? So it's a project management and team collaboration tool. I'm going to be talking about the benefits, how it's organized, what I would say is a good organizational structure for creating what's called a Trello board, which is just a web page. And then every hero has a dark side. And so I'll wrap up with a couple thoughts about things to try and avoid, or ways that Trello doesn't seem to work as effectively, at least in my experience. Okay, so benefits. So, and this is something I've really learned. We've been using Trello since 2017 or 2018, but it's only recently that I really sort of like felt like I understood, like, oh, wow, this can really help me. So the first is that it helps with scoping a project. So it really kind of, if you use it correctly, it really allows you to think about, okay, well, I want to do this project. So my project last year was garden boxes on the space between City Hall and the Annex. And if I had used Trello, I think it would have, when I was doing my prototype, it would have forced me to think about, okay, what are the steps that I need to do to get to garden boxes on the plaza? And then as you go along, you sort of like say, like, here's a specific task, like, let me talk to general services about whether we can utilize some of those existing boxes. But then you realize, like, oh, I need to break this down further. So I think it encourages granularity in a way that's very helpful. It's also a visual representation of the project that allows you to see progress. So I think if you use it properly, you can see, like, oh, even though I feel like I'm running in place and going nowhere, actually, here's everything I've accomplished so far. I think it's also a really consumable reference for others, again, because it's visual. And so I know a lot of you are working solo on your Ideastarter project. I did as well, but I think it's a good like touchstone for like your mentor. If you have other people you want to engage in the process, if you do have team members, obviously it's a great resource for the team. Shannon, obviously, like if she's like, oh, how's it going? What are you doing? Just say, hey, go to my Trello board and see what type of progress I'm making. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the organizational structure. Trello is organized around boards. So this is the board. It's basically the web page. Lists, which are these vertical columns, and those can be organized like around a specific component of a project. It'll be easier to understand how you might organize a list once we look at an actual board. And then within the lists are the cards. Yep, there we go. And cards are really where you sort of lay out your individual tasks. And the cards are nice because you can actually do checklists within the cards. So for instance, going back to I need to talk to general services, maybe the first one is like, I could do a checklist that says, all right, call Alex Johnson, who is actually one of the people I talk to in general services, arrange a day to move the planter boxes, have the watering set up, something like that. Or maybe talk to Alex Johnson is its own card. And within that, you have a checklist of, here are the questions I have for Alex that I need to talk to him about. So you can also do attachments. You can add members. Like if you have someone who you want to look at a particular card, you can add them and tag them so that they know there's something out there to look at. Cards can have due dates. Checklists can also have due dates. You can use labels. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we're looking at a specific board. And then you can also have links to URLs. So if you have a presentation you want your mentor to look at, you could just add that URL and the person could go there, click on that, and pull up your draft presentation. So proposed project structure. So for what I found recently has been a really great project structure is like a resources list. So if you have, if you're looking and you've got background research, you can put the resources in that. Your to-do list, so that's your punch list of like, here's every task I need to do. For instance, again, with the prototype, the in progress list means a card only ends up there if you're actively working on it. And I would encourage cards in the in progress list to have a due date, a QC list. Now, not everything has to go through QC, like the talk to Alex Johnson. Maybe that doesn't go through QC, but write draft prototype document. It makes sense for that to go into a QC. You tag someone on it, they give you feedback, and maybe it pops back to your in progress list, and then done. And obviously that's where you want everything to end up. And then you're super excited because that done list grows and grows and grows while your to-do list starts to shrink. All right, so let me see if we can actually have it so you can see my board. I'm thinking all right, Dan, can you give me a thumbs up if you can actually see my board?
Yep.
All right, awesome, man, thanks. So this is the landing page for our Public Works GIS account, but I'm gonna have us look specifically. So I'll show you an active board we have that has that format I talked about. So we're doing some web development on a custom help page to go with our web map. So we've got resources here. So we've got the project scope in there. Problem definition is in there as well. Here's our to-do list of remaining tasks. Here's our in progress. This is what people are actively working on. And so you can see we've got some members tagged up here. We've got a description and a shortcut to the document people need to add to. And then we've got a checklist of the content that we need created and folks assigned to it along with deadlines for those tasks. And then we've got a lot stacked up in QC right now. And we should have people who are tagged on that to review that for QC. And I would expect, again, that things would move back from QC into in progress as they're reviewed and there have to be corrections. And then, of course, we've got a completed list, which has almost nothing in it right now. And then finally, in this board, we added some meeting notes because we were having issues with communication. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up more or less by talking about a demo board I created yesterday that's designed more around the Ideastarter project, right? So in terms of resources, I've got a card for the Ideastarter materials. So here's that link that Shannon has sent us all for the Google Drive. I've got a minimum viable product defined. So if I click on that, oops, I actually don't have anything in there. It should be completed. I've got the vision statement. So right now it's a definition of what a vision statement is, but the idea is like, oh, I'm going to write my vision statement for my project, and I'm going to be able to then, that will go through the to-do, in progress, QC process, and then that will actually land back into the resources column because it'll become a touchstone for like, oh, okay, are we hewing to what we're trying to solve and what our goals are. I added the stakeholder mapping in here. Again, it's a resource. And then actually these down here are a couple of cards that I created that are related to my my Ideastarter project from last year. Just as an example, like, so one of the questions is who's doing work similar to the project you're trying to do. And so I threw a couple cards in related to other organizations that do work around gardens and access to vegetables. Okay, so currently on the to-do list, what I created is based on last week's meeting, right? Mapping stakeholders, researching the landscape, and writing the problem vision statement. And so if you're actively working on it, you would then, pop the cards into the in progress, and maybe you'd add a due date for it. So let's say next Friday. Save that. And then let's say that you reach a place where you're like, oh, I've mapped my stakeholders. I want Shannon to take a look at it. Then you could go in here and tag her as a member. Maybe write a short description here. Let's see. And then you could add a URL to it. And Shannon could go and look at it and give you some feedback. And then again, probably pop it back to in progress. Okay, so that's a really quick sort of overview of what I think is a useful structure for a Trello board. Let me wrap up by talking about, so I added some slides just in case we couldn't access the Trello board. So those are in the presentation. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, which is avoiding the dark side. Too many boards. Make sure your boards have a clear purpose. And I think project boards work better than general boards. So we have some boards, like each of us has our own individual board where we track what we're working on. That actually, I don't think works that effectively because it doesn't necessarily serve as a really good touchstone, and you just end up with a lot of cards on that board. Board avoidance. So I showed you that help webpage board. We initially tried to have that be a list. So we had this list on an existing board, and it ended up with all of these cards, and we had no way of knowing what the status of the cards were really. We tried to use labels, but that wasn't a good way to do it. And so it became a communication problem for us. And it didn't give us a sense, again, of forward progression, which I think the board really can do. Label overload. As you saw, actually, I don't really use labels. We have some staff folks who use labels like they were just going out of style. And so you go on their boards and it's just like a riot of color. And that's just, you just can't process all that information. Like a good label is blocked. Like if you had a task you're working on, but you can't make any forward progress for some reason, blocked is a really good label. We do a lot of mapping, as I said earlier. So for us, we tag cards by like what type of utilities need to be mapped, and that's been very effective. But general, I think you have to be very careful about labels. And then checklist overload. So as I said, we map projects, and we have one list that has this like checklist of everything you should do when you're reviewing data before we add it into our utility GIS databases. And one of the checklists has 60 items on it. I have never ever used that checklist. Like it's completely overwhelming to me. It's at a level of granularity that I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I think some people find that useful. And so if you find it useful, do it. But you have to really think about like, is this too much information? And I guess that's sort of one thing I would say is that I like that Trello pushes me toward granularity, but you can go like too far to that other side. So you kind of have to figure out where's that sweet spot. And that is basically it for me. I don't know why I had that fade in, but I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I'll take any questions, but also if you want to, you know, hit me up later, you can certainly do that. Dan, are you clapping or do you have your hand up?
Well, that is a clap, but I was going to raise my hand also.
Huh?
So, I think for my project, this is going to be a good resource. But it sounds like you're actually using it for your group's work, like daily work. Do you think that, like, I have kind of an operations, like a field team. They're not really on the computer much. Like, I don't know if I could get them into this. Like, you have any suggestions about that? Like with people with like maybe once or twice a day access to a computer?
Um, and so obviously we don't have that situation. I will say, I think it's a good way to sort of start the day to figure out like, oh, what's in the queue? What are my priorities? It's very helpful to use the list as a prioritization. I also have it on my phone. It's actually, I think the app is well designed and quite useful in that way. So I think it has potential. I just don't know. Like part of it's the barrier for entry in terms of whether people want to look at, you know, a computer and sort of organize themselves that way.
Yeah.
But it's also something that if people are out in the field and you need to update them with something, it could be like, oh, go here and look because I've just added a card.
I guess I missed that it was on the phone. Did you mention that? And I just wasn't
I
paying
didn't.
attention.
I didn't
Oh, okay.
mention it.
Cool. Yeah, that actually, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure, of course.
Sean, did you say if there's notifications that come through when you tag people or assign people to different things?
Yeah, so a person has to set up their notifications such that they do see things. But yeah, I mean, you can get a notification in a couple different ways. It hooks into, I think it hooks into Slack now, which is also something that we use. But for a while, I was getting like a lot of email notifications until I turned that off because I was like, no, I don't want to know every time you touch a card that I'm involved with. But yeah, it definitely does.
I have two questions. Thanks, Sean, by the way.
Sure.
First of all, do you have to have some kind of subscription to have full functionality of it, or is it a totally free web-based thing? And the other question is, I saw when you added members, some members were automatically there that you could add, but where do you access members that you add?
So I added Shannon the other day, and I think you could actually so the demo board that I created publicly available, it's searchable. And so your answer is, we have PWGIS has a paid account because we were exploring some of the additional functionality, but we started off with a free account. And I think at this point, we're not actually using the paid components of it that effectively. So I think the bulk of what you might want to do, you can do without having to pay anything. And Shannon did not have a Trello account, so I had to like, so it was searching. It was like, oh, let me see if I can find a Shannon Delaney, and so I just had to key in her actual, like, you know, I think I used her. No, I used your work email. So you can add people who don't actually have an account. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know what their level of functionality is, like what the limitations on that are.
I have a question.
Yes.
First, well, two-part question. First of all, how long have you been using Trello?
I think we started using it later in 2017, maybe 2018.
Okay, so you've been using roughly about two to 3 years.
Yeah.
What would you say, since you've been using, what would you say is the biggest advantage of using this software compared to the rest?
So to me, and really it's very recently that I'm like, oh, this is now working for me. It is like, it works best on stuff that's project based, and therefore has sort of like a linearity to it. Again, we use it also to track like our like sort of daily tasks as a way that we can then kick it out at the end of the fiscal year and report out for like your SMART goals and stuff like that. And to me, it's not as effective. But when it's the sense of like, oh, I have a specific project that I can say, here are the boundaries of this project. Here's everything I need to do in that project. And then you can begin to say, okay, this week, I am actively working on these items, so that it sort of clears the field a little bit for you. So it's not like, oh, I have this, you know, I have this piece of paper and I've got 20 things on it, and which am I working on? It's sort of like, oh, I'm working on these 2 things. I'm moving them over to my in progress list. That's what I'm working on. And then I also like this sense of like, I'm moving them and things are happening. I'm seeing progress.
Okay.
So we got sort of stuck on our help website that we were working on. And people got kind of frustrated, and we were all sort of frustrated with each other, I think. And then it was really helpful to go and look at the board and be like, oh yeah, we're super frustrated. We've had some real issues, but look at everything, even though you don't really see it in the board, we were able to create a list of here's everything we've done, here's the stuff that remains, and see that movement again. And it's also it's nice to have a place for people to go and look at stuff. Like, you're not sending emails and being like, here's the link to this thing I need you to look at, and then they lose the email. It's like, go to the board. It's always on the board. It's in my resource list on the board, you know?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely beneficial. I think I like that aspect of it, because when people actually see the progress they are making, you know, it kind of motivate them to do, okay, we almost there to go, let's do more. So yeah, I think I would like that also.
Yeah,
Thank you for answering my question.
sure. And that's something. So in thinking about, like, if I had used this last year, right, for my Ideastarter project, I think, so I see the way you might use it right now is different from the way you would use it when you're prototyping, right? So right now it's about like, oh, I've got to do my module level 1 tasks. And then when you get to, okay, here's my prototype, then it sort of transitions to like, oh, here are the tasks I need to do to get to having completed my prototype and starting to collect data about that prototype. So you can use it in both ways. You can use it for both aspects, I think, of the Ideastarter project, but you kind of use it in 2 different ways, if that makes any sense. I can also, I'm happy to throw anybody who wants me to, I can throw I can invite you to the board, and we can figure out. Shannon, have you noticed whether you can move cards on the board and stuff like that?
I didn't want, yeah, no, I didn't try messing with your stuff, so I don't know. I can look in there though.
Okay. So yeah, so anyway, definitely feel free to reach out to me again. I'll also, I should have done this before, but Trello actually, I think, has some good resources and blogs and stuff, sort of like getting started. This new board setup that I'm using, I got by looking at Trello and Agile. And there's some really good articles about that. So I'll actually add this stuff as links on the resource page for the demo board. And so you can look at it.
That'd be great. And then, yeah, share with me the deck and I can hold that for people.
Yeah.
And then I'll put it in the same spot where I'm putting the recording.
Okay. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Sean. This has been great. If anyone has any other questions, otherwise I'm gonna switch us over to Aaron's tutorial for stakeholder interview.